Hello and welcome to the Relationship Clinic podcast. I'm Renee Natvig, your host, and today we continue our series, Divorcing with Dignity. My special guest today is Kelly Forst. Kelly is an attorney. She was a paralegal for 8 years before returning to law school at Syracuse University, where she received her JD degree in 1999. She did all this while working as a paralegal and a law office manager and raising 2 sons. Ms. Forst was admitted to practice in 2000 and has been practicing in New York since that time. In 2016, she was admitted to practice in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and this year, 2018, she was admitted to practice in the state of Florida. She is the founder and owner of Forst Law Firm with offices in Rochester, New York and Orlando, Florida. Her practice emphasis has been in matrimonial and family law, including divorce, custody, child support, and other family matters. But she has expanded her practice to include estate planning and administration and real estate in both Florida and New York. She is a past chair of the Monroe County Bar Association Family Law Section Council, and she sat on the board of directors of CLARA, the Collaborative Law Association of the Rochester area. She served on several committees of both CLARA and MCBA, including the Professional Performance Committee. After 15 years of representing parties in litigated, mediated, and collaborative divorces and in family court matters, Kelly now confines her family law practice to the representation of clients participating in the collaborative and mediated divorce processes. She is a member of the Collaborative Family Law Group of Central Florida. Enjoy the interview. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Renee. Good to be here.
Great. Today I want to start with just helping people understand all the options that are available to them as they unfortunately are traveling down this path of divorce. We know that there are different possibilities as to how that goes, and maybe you can help lay that out for people.
Sure. So there's a kind of a continuum, I think. First and the easiest is the kitchen table, where people just sit across the kitchen table and figure out what they're going to do. And maybe they'll bring it to an attorney to write up the paperwork, but essentially they've decided that, they just want to figure it out for themselves.
And they're able to do that. Like people just
Yep.
just say, I want this and I want this,
Yep.
and they just basically write it down. And
I just finished a divorce in New York, actually, where my client and her husband kind of sat together, figured everything out. There were a couple small issues that they needed help from the attorneys with, and we had one 4-way conference with the 2 attorneys and the 2 clients, and we kind of worked out those 2 small issues that they really couldn't come to an agreement on, and that was it. So I would call that a kitchen table divorce. Then in the continuum, I think, sometimes I don't know where to put collaborative and mediation in the continuum because they're pretty much in the same place, but I'll go with mediation first. Mediation is a process where the parties go to one neutral person. And I know in different geographic locations it's different. Sometimes they're attorneys, sometimes they're mental health. They have people who have a mental health background that are doing the mediation. I usually recommend that people have an attorney in the background, whether their mediator is an attorney or not, because if the mediator is acting truly as a mediator, then they are neutral. And they are not giving legal advice to either party. They're just there to help them decide.
Yeah, what's their role as the mediator? Maybe you can help people understand.
Sure. So the role as a mediator is to offer options, is to help them identify issues that they do need to resolve, to kind of give legal information, not legal advice.
Okay.
And even that, I feel like, is kind of drawing a fine line, and can be risky, because people hear things in different ways too. So, but essentially that's it. They're there to be neutral, not to advocate for either one of the couple, but to just give them the resources that they need in order to make the decisions. And like I said, I always think it's a good idea for people to have an attorney in the background to give them legal advice, but also to not tear apart their agreement if they've come to one that seems fair to them based on the way their relationship is
Not
gone.
to get in the way of that mediated process.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So that's mediation. And then, of course, there needs to be an attorney who does draft the agreement, drafts the divorce documents, and so forth, and submits it to court. So there generally, I think, is an attorney somewhere along the line in a mediated agreement. Then there is the collaborative process, which in my practice, I've committed only to doing collaborative, these three, collaborative, kitchen table, or mediated divorces. I won't litigate anymore. I did that for 15 years and enough of that, and I'll explain a little bit about
Okay.
But in a collaborative divorce, well, there are slightly different models throughout the country. I'm an attorney in New York and Virginia and in Florida.
Oh, so you kind of have
I
a
have
perspective that crosses state
boundaries.
Yeah.
So I also am a member of AFCC, which is Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. And so you can also see when you go to big, nationwide, in fact, international conferences like that, that there is a wide variety of how people set up their collaborative groups. And
their team and their...
Well, the local groups have specific rules. They're called protocols that they have for their particular group. So, for example, I'm a member of CLARA, which is the Collaborative Law Association of the Rochester area. That's Rochester, New York. I'm also a member of the Collaborative Family Law Group of Central Florida. So in Orlando, and that's in Orlando. So the New York group, our model is that there's two attorneys, attorney for each party, and then there's the two parties, and that's the team essentially. Now, the attorneys can decide if they want a financial professional or a mental health professional or a child specialist or some other affiliated professional to join the group.
But the required team is just the two attorneys.
Just the two attorneys, that's it. Then, but in Florida, there's a financial professional that is a required part of every team. And that's fine too. I mean, that's just the way...
And the mental health neutral.
Particular group.
Yeah.
So, right, and the mental health neutral. So it's a bigger team process here. I think California does the bigger team process. And the idea is that all of these people, which I love this idea, that the professionals will help the couple not only make really informed choices for their family going forward, but will give them the resources that they need in order to do that. And so that's the practice model that I really have adopted, and I really think that helps people go forward in a little bit happier way,
right,
than they otherwise would, because they feel like they have control of their destiny.
That's an essential part of the collaborative model, right? To feel like each person has power in what's happening. Right. And the other thing is, now then you have litigation, and we'll just finish the continuum here, and I can really make some contrasts with that. Whereas, you may settle your litigated case, and it may even turn out that the settlement is very similar to what you have in a collaborative or a mediated or a kitchen table divorce, but what you don't have is control over the process. You don't, a judge is going to control what happens with timing and with, some decisions if you can't make them. And the idea in a collaborative case is that the parties are capable. We have faith that the parties are capable of making the best decisions for themselves and their families, far more than any judge ever could. And so, it may be that you end up going to trial on a litigated divorce, and in that case you have no control. The judge is going to tell you what you're going to do. You're not getting any kind of support. You're not getting any kind of guidance in terms of, how you go forward. Generally, your attorney is so preoccupied with trying your case and winning for you that they're not thinking about your children or your
finances going forward, or how are we going to make this work for everybody, and then the clients get put into that kind of model as well.
It's an interesting, when you say people are giving away their control, it doesn't seem like that, right? Probably when people are in the process of, litigating and, saying their side, and there's a sense of that's power, right? To be able to be
Sure.
heard, and they're going to see. So when you say that, that's not like you're giving that power to a judge, that probably it just is counterintuitive when people are in the process, maybe.
Well, I think if people are not focused on their interests and they're focused only on winning, that's when they feel like telling their story is their power.
Okay.
Right? But in the collaborative process, that's the other distinction, is that we are all focused on the client's interests. So for example, at the very first meeting, we'll sit down, we'll do the introductions, and we'll go over the ground rules and the issues that need to be resolved. So at the very first meeting, we're talking about process and substance. We're talking about what we're going to have to decide ultimately in this case. But what we're also doing is we're kind of setting the clients up to work cooperatively toward the interests that they might have in common. So for example, I would say to my client, so tell me what it is that you hope to accomplish through this process. And a very common answer is going to be, well, I want my children to be okay through all of this. And we'll go around to the other side, and of course, the other parent will generally say the same thing, right? So now we have a consensus that what we want is for the children to be okay through this.
So we're starting with an agreement.
Exactly. And, we may do that several times and come up with a number of interests that these people have in common, that they can agree upon, that will set them on the path toward making all of the decisions. It could be, I want everyone in my family to be able to be financially sound. Now, what that looks like ultimately, who knows? Is it going to be spousal maintenance for a period of time? Is it going to be somebody going back to school? Is it going to be somebody changing their job? Is it going to be somebody moving? I mean, we don't know what that's going to look like, but they at least have that interest in common that they can work toward together. And then, of course, the collaborative team, the mental health professionals, the financial professionals, will all do their part, give their input on what the possibilities are for that. Because, two heads are better than one.
Right. I'm thinking of most times people, maybe this is their first divorce, maybe their second divorce, and that's the extent of their experience and knowledge.
And then trying to figure these things out.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
And so people who are used to that creative or collaborative kind of thinking have probably been through lots of solutions and ideas.
Sure. And the attorneys that that I've worked with have done. I've done probably 40 or 50 collaborative divorces. So, and as you do more, you get more ideas and more experience, and it just becomes easier, and you learn so much as you go. And so I think that's a big difference between collaborative professionals and litigators, because the litigators, they're taking their CLEs, they're not doing the collaborative CLEs on learning how to have non-defensive communication or any of the other collaborative trainings that we do. They're learning how to get in evidence, they're learning how to do a deposition, they're all of those things that you need to know in order to be a good trial lawyer, right? And so they're just not focused on those same skills that the collaborative professionals tend to have.
Okay.
So I think, does that answer
that's a nice summary, so people can maybe find themselves along that continuum of process.
What's going to work for them. And it does depend a little bit on how much support people feel they need. Right? I mean, I to your point, I think that there are people who feel that they need, for example, people who are victims of domestic violence may feel that they need a lot more support. They need somebody who's just going to be the warrior, go in, take care of this for them, because they're just maybe so beaten down or emotionally fragile that they just can't
imagine
even
themselves
participate. So they need somebody, and that's okay too. Whatever works for the individual. I'm not here to say one process is better than the other. I just know that in my practice, I prefer to focus on healing, wellness, having people come out on the other side, maybe even in a better place than they started. Not a worse one.
So you're passionate about collaborative. What led you towards it? What was your initial introduction to it, and did it resonate right away, or did you
I'll tell you. Thinking about that, I know exactly what it was. I when I was in law school, I knew I wanted to study family law because I was working for a firm where family law was a large part of what the firm's practice was. I had been involved, I was the paralegal in the firm, and the attorney I worked for was representing a dad whose child had been very severely abused by someone in the mom's family. And we don't think it was the mom, but we thought it was maybe her stepchild or someone else that had abused this boy. And when I saw the pictures, and it became really personal for me for several reasons, but I was incensed when that child ended up back at the mother's home, because the attorney in New York, we have, instead of a guardian ad litem like we have in Florida, there's an attorney assigned to every child who is in a contested custody dispute in New York. That's by statute, actually. So I wanted to become an attorney for children, and that's why I went to law school. That's what I started out doing, and so I really wanted to focus on helping children. And so that was the first thing that drew me to the collaborative process, because when I first heard about it, I remember thinking, this is such a respectful way for parents to go forward with a divorce and still think about what's best for their children without tearing each other apart. Because I had seen, obviously, too many of those types of cases. So there was that. And then there was an attorney who was one of the first to be trained in the collaborative practice, who I had seen at a motion calendar when I was brand new practicing law, probably in the year 2000. And I just looked at this woman and I said, I want to be just like her. I just want to be a lawyer just like her. And so when she was the one who started advertising, collaborative practice, and I'm doing a train. She was the initial trainer for our group, for the Clara group in Rochester. I was like, I'm in. That's it.
What were some qualities about her, and maybe about yourself, that feels like a fit for collaborative, and maybe mediation and support? I don't know, just how that.
Well, she is extraordinarily professional. Never a.
And I'll include you in this too, if any of these
well,
resonate.
Thanks. I don't know. I try. But she was just super bright, and and at the same time very caring, and just really compassionate. And so, and that just really said to me, okay, this. As a lawyer, I don't want to be a fighter. I want to be a helper. And I think that's how I see myself. I see myself more as a guide you know, as someone who's guiding my clients through the process rather than kind of, you know, fighting through the through the brush and getting to you know, a winning situation,
victory.
To a victory, right? I want to get them to a happier place on the other side.
That, you know, that's interesting too. I'm just thinking about, there is such a place for people who, you know, are cutting the brush and getting to the, you know, there's places that's really valuable.
Of course.
And, and then this is a different way, maybe with different goals, as
It
far
is.
as.
And again, it's the interest-based decision making that the collaborative process you know, brings to the table that none of the other processes really do. Even in mediation, I don't know how, you know, I mean, I've had plenty of mediation training. Never in my mediation training did I learn about interest-based negotiations. It's always about
Can maybe explain that
being
term?
neutral.
Yeah, explain that term just for people if they're.
It's just more about how people can really come to a commitment about what they hope to achieve in terms of their own interests. I can't think of another word
as
for
you said
it.
that, I'm thinking, so starting with what the desire is rather than maybe the finished, like what it's going to exactly look like.
Yeah, yes, right.
You know,
It's
like,
about
I have to have this.
It's about what do we care about.
Right.
Right. What do we care about as a family?
And because the form of that could be different.
Could be anything. It could. I mean, I've heard people say things like, "I really want my children to grow up in a particular faith." To me, that means so much. Or, like I said before, I want my family to be financially healthy. Or it could be, this house has been in my family. I did have this case. This house has been in my family for 150 years. This house needs to stay in my family. I'm interested in that emotional attachment to the family. And, you know, the other spouse was like, I totally get it. That is an interest that I have too. This house for our children should stay in the family. So could be anything.
And then how are we going to work that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How are you going to make that happen then?
And then and then the people, the clients they
how
consider
it's gonna
those
work.
options.
Yeah, we give them options and they decide how we want to, how they want to do it. Right. So yeah, that's what I see in the collaborative process. That is so, I don't know, it's hopeful. You know, there's a positive side to it. Your divorce does not have to be ugly. Your divorce does not have to be a battle. Your divorce can be an experience that can be transformative for you and your partner, and it can really make you better co-parents. It can make you, you know, just better people. I mean, I know that sounds like really like, you know, almost, I don't know. Some people say that the collaborative group tends to be a little bit preachy almost, but
idealistic.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
But when you put forth those goals, and then
it's all
towards them, yeah,
you know, nothing is perfect,
right?
So.
Yeah, maybe talk about that when it's not perfectly. We're talking about maybe some ideal situations or some ways that people, you know, imagine it could go. When it's not ideal, maybe what are some different forms that might take? And
I guess the best thing I can do is give you an example. So I had a case in New York where the client came to me and he was not a client that I wanted to work with. There were many issues about his personality, about the way the divorce happened, and I said, no, I can't represent you. I just turned him away as a client. And I gave him 3 names and said, here you go, call, you know, one of these people. and he really wanted it to be brutal, you know. And so I gave him 3 names, 3 of the toughest litigators that I knew, and said, here you go, this is who you want. And he came back, he called me about a week later and was extremely emotional and said, I think you're the only person that can help me, literally. He said, I want you as my lawyer. What do I have to do? And I said, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We will do it only collaboratively, and we will do it with a mental health professional in the room at all times. And that's what we did. His wife found an attorney and who was, amicable to that. And she happened to be a new collaborative attorney. I think it was her first or second case. And, I'm a big believer that those of us who are more experienced have an obligation to, kind of train the new people coming up. I do take that responsibility seriously. But this was probably not the case for that. And so we ended up with the mental health professional really, we had to caucus these people a lot, which meant they were in separate rooms with us a lot.
Because usually in collaborative, everybody's in the room processing.
A table, and everybody's at the table. You might have the mental health professional at the table. You might have the financial professional at the table. They can be offline also, where the parties go see them. Right. In between meetings. But in this case, we had the mental health professional there at all times, and he was going back and forth between meeting rooms a lot. We did resolve it. It was a successful collaborative case ultimately, but it was really not easy. It was a very difficult case. And that's another thing that I want to kind of bring up. Collaborative law, some people think of it as divorce light, right? Where it's easier than the litigated divorces. And I would challenge that because the skills that the collaborative attorneys bring to the table are far more, I don't want to say harder, because litigation is hard, but it provides to the client some really hard emotional benefit that is sometimes really difficult to bring to a case. This particular client had some views that that just didn't sit well with me, and so I had to represent him, and I did represent him, but the mental health professional was a big help in that. I've also had cases where both parties were diagnosed with some pretty serious mental health issues, and those cases are not perfect.
Okay.
It's very difficult for some people to come to conclusions, come to decisions. They vacillate, or they, what's the word when you perseverate, right? And then, go over the same thing over and over again. And the collaborative process goes only as quickly as the slowest participant. So, so if you've got somebody who's perseverating and thinking about wants to talk about the same thing over and over again,
that's going to kind of slow it down.
Right,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it isn't for everyone.
And maybe what you're saying is those are cases where it might not be ideal looking, but you're still resolving. Yeah.
Yep. And I did resolve that. We did resolve that case.
Right.
Yep. So I don't think I've ever had a case that started out collaborative that did not end collaboratively. That it just fell apart. So the commitment in a collaborative case is that everyone agrees not to go to court. Right. There is no threat to go to court. There is no, conditional, if you do this, we're going to have to go to, there's none of that. The commitment is that we will make a full agreement at the table, and then the parties, the attorneys will just submit paperwork to the court. Ultimately, we'll draft an agreement and submit the paperwork.
So that's a commitment to this team, like this team and these attorneys will not go to court.
And the parties too.
Well,
parties agree.
So that's an agreement. Ultimately,
if they always get out of it.
Right.
They can opt out of that if they do, but if they do, they lose their attorneys. The
Right.
attorneys cannot continue in on the case.
Right.
The attorneys have to, there's a 30-day period where everything's put on hold, giving both parties an opportunity to obtain litigation counsel.
Right.
And then, we turn over our files and, whatever we have
Okay.
to the litigation attorney. Not everything. You don't get the notes, and you don't get
Right.
You don't get all of your your attorney work product. You don't get, but they would get the financials if we've exchanged those and so forth.
Because the clients already have those.
Yeah, clients already have them. We've already done it. I mean, the way I see it, I don't want the clients to have to go through all that work again.
Mm-hmm.
They may decide that they want to start from scratch, depending on the attorneys. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would give them what I had in terms of the client's work, and yeah, I don't want people to have to spend more money
Right.
than they have to.
Right.
Right.
And yeah, I have talked with a couple of attorneys about cost, if that makes sense for people as they're considering these different options. So kitchen table, they might still have attorneys, but they're in a process where they can kind of come to an agreement without much support. So it might be least expensive that way.
Probably, right.
Mediation.
Mediation is probably the next least expensive. Only because for most of the time that you're spending, it's with a mediator. And that's one person who you're splitting the parties are splitting the fee. And then they each, if they do have an attorney in the background that's giving them legal advice, of course that's, another expense, but that's not doing all the negotiations either.
Right.
And we do have those meetings in the collaborative process as well, those offline meetings in between each group meeting with our respective clients, so that
Client with attorney and client with attorney.
so that we can talk to them about, what are their concerns? Is everything going okay? What other interests do they have that they might want to bring to the table, and so forth.
Okay. And then as far as collaborative, it does make sense too with mediation. You have one opinion that's trying to help you, and maybe you can resolve everything. Maybe you can think long term about what that will mean for you. And maybe it might not be least expensive if you haven't thought of everything.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I can't tell you how many. I can't tell you how many mediated agreements I saw after they had already been signed and entered into, as a divorce, that came back and they weren't either complete, they weren't legally sufficient, they weren't, because the people didn't have attorneys helping them do all of that. And now it's 3 years later and something has changed and they didn't anticipate it. This is not to say anything about mediators. I don't intend for that. It's about clients who come in to a mediator's office or an attorney's office and say, I just want this done. And I want it done as quickly and as inexpensively as possible. And, people respond to that. There's a sense of urgency about that. And so...
And they're meeting the client with where they're at, with what they think they want in that moment.
That's right. And as a human being, we have reactions to a sense of urgency when someone comes to us like that. And so we want to help them, and we want to do what we think they want. So I think that clients need to think about what a collaborative process or an attorney, at least who's trained in collaborative, can bring to them, whether they're at the table in mediation or at the collaborative table, or even in litigation. I mean, there are plenty of collaborative attorneys who also litigate.
They do both.
Right. And I did that for years in New York.
Okay.
So we have a special skill set that can help people, along the way in making their decisions. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything then, as you thought about today, thought about what you'd like people to know, your opportunity to speak to people as they're in this really important phase of their relationship, of their lives, of their possibly children. Oh, and something we haven't talked about, maybe, I don't know if you've used the collaborative process with anybody besides families or
I have
couples.
Not.
Okay.
No, I haven't, but I've often wondered about the application in other areas of law, like in commercial law, where there's a dispute between, two companies, for example, or an employee in a company.
Right.
I did. There was an organization in Rochester that had it was Center for Dispute Settlement, and they did community mediation where they had the police and citizens that they would bring would bring them in, neighborhood associations and citizens, and that was a great program for many years that operated in Rochester. So I think there are lots of potential applications for the collaborative process. I think it's originated by divorce lawyers for divorce clients. So I think
it's the most well-known maybe use of it.
I think, yeah. And I'm not sure that people have actually come up with other uses for it, honestly.
Okay.
I really don't know.
So if you had that opportunity to someone sat down with you, and I guess they regularly do, right? You inform people. What would you like our audience to know if they have the benefit of your experience?
Just that it gets better. I think divorce is the most difficult thing, short of like the death of a child or something so tragic that it's unspeakable, that people will ever go through, because it impacts their entire lives. It impacts their home, their finances, their emotional state, their sense of well-being. I mean, it impacts them so deeply. But it does get better. It will, if you do it in a way that's respectful and that is considering your interests and not just your position, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about positional bargaining when you're talking about either negotiation, traditional negotiation, or litigating. You're taking a position, this is the stand, and we're going to fight it out until one of us is not standing any longer, right?
And moves, maybe.
Or moves, right, exactly. So this is, if you can look at it from that perspective, it will be so much healthier for you, for your children, for your whole family. I mean, I do realize, I recognize that there is an impact to a divorce on an entire family system. There's grandparents, there's aunts and uncles, there's cousins, there are people who love you and your children. I'll never forget when I was divorced from my kid's dad. My father-in-law came to me. We were at one of my son's baseball games, and he came up, and it was the first time I had seen him since we'd been divorced. And he said to me, there's no such thing as an ex-daughter-in-law. And it was just the sweetest, most endearing thing, and he was a wonderful, endearing man. But people are impacted. And so I guess I just hope that people can kind of come out of their own pain, because that's really where they are, and just think about the people around them, the people who love them, the people in their family, their children especially, and understand that there is a better way to do it.
So we will, of course, have your information with the podcast details.
Great, thank you.
But go ahead for people, just they see you right now. If they wanted to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to do that?
The best way to do that would be to get on my website, and that is www.kellyforstlaw.com, and Forst is spelled F-O-R-S-T, or email me at Kelly@kellyforstlaw.com.
Kelly?
Correct.
Okay.
FORSTLAW.com.
All right.
That's
Great.
the best way.
Thanks again, Kelly.
Thank you.